They really have to do this? Well, it's a Devil May Cry game, so how could any of this go wrong? Well, ask any fan of the series which game they like the least, and other than trashing the DMC reboot, they're most likely gonna point you in the general direction of a DMC 2. So how bad could any of this go? Let's find out. Roll the fucking intro already. Before I start talking about the actual mess that is DMC2, there's actually a legit reason as to why that is the case. It's pretty much a mixed bag of Capcom's mismanagement with the new franchise at the time, and the one who directed DMC2 at first. After the success of the first Devil May Cry in Japan, for some odd reason, Capcom didn't bring back Hideki Kamiya and his Team Little Devils, who worked on the first game, but instead they ended up handing over the project to a mystery director and an entirely different team. The problem with this is that the new development team did not know what made Devil May Cry Devil May Cry. Trust me, this lack of experience with the development of the first game actually shows in the final product. But how bad could it be? Let's find out. Anyways, this is the part of the review where I'm supposed to talk about the game's storyline, but here's the problem. This game barely has a plot. If you want to know what this game is about, then here. Basically, Dante is hired on Vitamore Lee to take out an evil CEO who's trying to take the power of an evil demon king, Argosax, just to take over the world with it. That's basically all there is to know for story. But here's the problem with the storyline. Who is this evil demon businessman? Why does he want to obtain demonic power? Just for reasons? This game is a bit too cool for explanation, I guess. Here's another problem with this game. This game is infamous for butchering Dante's personality. You see, what made him likable in the first game was basically his devil may care attitude, which made him a cocky and wisecracking lovable badass that was entertaining to watch and play as. But here's the problem with this game. In this game, Dante is basically a mute who barely speaks a word.
Son of Sparda, you must repent your sins. Don't speak, just die.
Now I know some of the most popular characters in fictional media are pretty much stoic characters, but here's the problem with this version of Dante. This version of Dante doesn't have any unique quirks to him, and it doesn't have any unique personality traits that makes his level of stoicism interesting, which does effectively make Dante a quite boring character in this game, which is something that you do not want to do with any video game protagonist whatsoever. Plus, Dante has no reason to be in this game. You could quite literally swap him out with any other character, and it won't make much of a difference. And here's why that's the case. Throughout the entire plot, Dante has no motivation in even taking up this new job. Hell, he doesn't even show any sign of interest in any of the situations he's usually put in. Say what you will about the first game, but at the very least, Dante had a motivation to actually go to Malay Castle to avenge the death of his fallen mother. And I am gonna talk about this at a later time, but in Devil May Cry 3, Dante has a legit reason to be in the game. It's also worthy to note that in this game, Dante has a pretty weird coin flip motif, where before he accepts any job request, he basically has to flip the coin, and if it comes out as heads, then he would accept said request. And here's the thing, by the end of the game, when we discover that the coin all along had heads on both sides, which makes the coin flip rather pointless if he was going to accept the job either way. But the new character of Lucia actually shows some good potential for character development, by the fact that she was actually created by Arius, and because of that she shows a few suicidal tendencies, but however, this character development potential is pretty much squandered by the bad voice acting and the bad dialogue that this game has. If you don't believe me, take a look at some of these cutscenes.
Why did you save me? I was created by him.
Every hero has a weakness. You were looking for?
Yes. Now we can stop Arius' ambition.
Whatever.
All in all, the problem with the game's plot is that everything happens with no rhyme or reason. For example, why did Lucia meet Dante in this museum just to immediately leave? How did Lucia dress up as Arius' guards, and when did she get the time to do so? Why the hell didn't Dante take the opportunity to kill Arius while he clearly had the chance to stop this world-ending apocalyptic event that's about to happen? And also, who in the ass is Argosax, and why does he need to get resurrected? And what the hell is he gonna do once he gets resurrected? And the game is just like, fuck that shit! Who plays those games for good stories, am I right? Well, that would be the case if the gameplay was rock solid, like how it is in most Ninja Gaiden games, but however, the gameplay is deeply flawed in its own right. Let's get into it, shall we? The gameplay of DMC2 follows the same format as the gameplay of the first game, but something feels off right from the get-go. You see, the main focus isn't necessarily on combo strings. Hell, you even get most of your style points just by dodging, where pretty much a lot of combo string options are pretty much absent in this game. You see, in the first game, you actually had a variety of different attacks with the different devil arms that you acquire, such as Alistair and Ifrit. You could vary up your attacks with very slight pauses in between button inputs. However, DMC2 has no such thing. The only skills that you do get are pretty much Stinger and High Time, but other than that, the melee combat ends up feeling way too button mashy, where you're just mashing the attack button with no thought put into it, resulting in a lot of this. Because of the removal of pause combos, one of the integral features that was removed from the first game was the ability to purchase new combos and techniques, which was a defining aspect of the first game, where you would unlock combos for a devil arm to perform more stylish combos with, such as buying the all fun and very satisfying Kick 13 combo for Ifrit, which was well worth the purchase. However, in this game, all you could do is basically upgrade the damage output of a single devil arm, which makes killing a lot of the enemies and bosses with the same repetitive combo a lot easier, which ends up making the game much more of a bore to play. Which brings me to another point. The devil arms here are extremely bland, to say the least. In a game like this, it's supposed to be top priority to actually make different weapons that have different and distinct qualities to one another. I know that they can't reuse the same devil arms from the previous game, since Dante usually sells his devil arms after each mission. Yes, that is actual confirmed Devil May Cry canon from the Japanese audio drama CD. But they could have at least come up with new and creative ones instead of 3 swords that have the same identical function. And most of my complaints and gripes with the combat and devil arms actually do apply to Lucia's disc. But hey, who would want to go through a second round of this crap at this point? But here are the mechanics that the development team actually had time to polish, and that is the firearm gunplay. Yeah, the weapons that were used in DMC1 to actually facilitate combos and deal with a lot of aerial enemies are the main focus of this game. You even start out with overpowered ebony and ivory pistols that can basically mow down anything that comes in its way. Hell, you could even juggle most of the enemies, no high time required. The problem actually gets worse when you end up unlocking more firearms like the dual SMGs and the rocket launcher and shotgun, where you get a lot of gameplay moments that look exactly like this.
Eat lead!
Hell, I'm not even surprised that a lot of these design decisions were actually responsible for making the upgrade system solely be based around upgrading damage output, since you can't really make a lot of stylish combos while shooting a gun, so it basically feels like the melee combat was tacked on just to focus more in on the guns. However, the problems don't stop right here. Apparently, before the game was in development, Capcom actually sent out surveys to actually see what people's complaints were about the first game, and one of these complaints were that it was too hard, so the development team went into the other extreme, which was making the game too easy for its own good. Even the enemy AI has been replaced by empty bags of air. They are literally so brain dead at times, where I'm right in front of them, and they're not even attacking me. And when they do attack you, which is a rarity by the way, their attacks are so easy to telegraph, so you don't even have to think too much about dodging them. Another thing that does suffer from this design choice, the gun-focused design choices and the too easy difficulty choice, are basically the boss battles. In the first game, it basically took you a lot of skill, and you had to vary up your attack just to defeat the bosses, but in this game, however, it basically involves you standing back at a distance and shooting them repeatedly with ebony and ivory or any of the other firearms, which by far the biggest offender of this is the infamous infested chopper fight. There are only two good boss fights in the game, which are basically the Despair Embodied and the Baldric bosses, where you actually have to vary up your attacks, which kinda reminded me of Nello Angelo a bit, but those somewhat well-designed bosses can only be counted on one hand. Yeah, there are only two well-designed bosses, the rest are utter boring shite. Even though I crapped on the first game for having underwater levels, but at least it did not have underwater puzzles or an underwater boss fight when it came to Lucia's campaign. But I've been giving the game too much of a bashing throughout this review, but there are some positive aspects to the gameplay, like unlocking different trigger hearts. You see, throughout the game, you end up unlocking different trigger hearts, which could alter your devil trigger abilities, like flying and other elemental attacks, etc. This system was most likely put in place to compensate for the lack of the variety in the devil arms and the lack of unlockable skills, won't you say? Another aspect that I do like about the devil triggers is Dante's Majin devil trigger. Basically, when you're low in health and you end up activating the Despair devil trigger, which is basically the Majin devil trigger, a very powered up state where Dante is almost invincible, even though it adds to the problem of the game being too easy, but in terms of design and some of the abilities, it's a pretty cool feature. A few things I'll be giving props to Devil May Cry 2 for is basically the introduction of multiple playable characters into the series through Lucia's campaign, and for also expanding on Dante's mobility through the dodge button by adding wall running and flipping maneuvers and the ability to shoot in multiple directions, aerial melee attacks, which will become templates for the style abilities in Devil May Cry 3 and other subsequent entries of the franchise. Also, one bit of praise I will be giving this game is basically the on-the-fly switching for your firearms, where it basically cuts down on menuing, which is a good innovation to have in the entire series. On one side note, I decided to unlock Trish for this review and experiment with her a bit, and I have this to say. Ironically, she's a lot more fun to play as than Dante. For starters, you actually have your pause combos back, and your guns don't automatically juggle enemies unless you're in Devil Trigger, which is how it was supposed to work with Dante, but it doesn't make the game magically really good, because you still have to deal with brain dead AI and a lot of the shooty bosses, and to unlock Trish, you quite literally have to go through the game twice as Dante just to unlock the hidden playable Trish, and like you and me both, we don't have time to go through that shit again. Well, what else is there to talk about? I could talk about the game's level design and presentation, but by God, are some of these the blandest levels in video game history. I mean, in DMC2, the levels that you're going to be going through are a mishmash of underground ruins, urban cities, castles, and evil laboratories and business buildings interiors. But here's one thing that all of these levels have in common. They are sloppily put together, and they have no distinct characteristics or personalities of their own, unlike the first game. And you can even explore random parts of the location that you're in to get more information out of it. Another problem that I do have with this game's levels is that they're too big for their own good. I know they wanted it to be bigger than the first game's levels by twice as much, but here's the problem with that. Most of the time, you'll be running through large and empty hallways just looking for something to do, and at the end, your reward is gonna be one measly red orb. Since I've been running my mouth about level design elements, I just gotta say this right off the bat. This game's graphics and visuals somehow look way worse than the graphics of the first Devil May Cry, and the first game was pretty much a early PS2 launch title. Other than bland and lackluster level design, which is a contributing factor to why the graphics in this game are worse than the first game, here's another factor that contributes to this heavily. It's basically some of the bland enemy designs where some of them look like literal shite. You could smell them all the way from here. At worst, they are very lazy and uninspired. At best, you get some pretty mediocre enemy designs. Even though I've been harping negatively on this game's presentation, however, there are positive aspects of DMC2's presentation. One of them being the soundtrack, which is quite literally better than the actual game itself. Like the first game, while you're wandering without any enemies to fight, you will hear an eerie OST playing in the background. Just listen to this one. And when you find yourself in battle, which rarely occurs in this game, you will hear a blood-pumping OST that is quite frankly much more exciting than most of the battles you'll be having in this game. Listen to this track. Another thing DMC2 has going for it in the presentation department is basically the designs of the main character. For example, Dante's design is a fan favorite design for a very good reason. His design in DMC2 features a very sleek and stylish design that we unfortunately do not see throughout the rest of the series or through any of the crossover material that Devil May Cry has been featured in, other than Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. I mean, Dante in this game looks badass whether if it's his base human form or his devil triggers. Hell, even Lucia looks pretty damn good in this game. I mean, she has a very unique and sleek design that's pretty much unique to her own. I mean, she looks pretty damn sexy in that design. One thing I will give DMC2 praise is how the main characters animate, because the main characters do have solid animations that are not janky and that move quite fluently. On its own, Devil May Cry 2 is a very passable hack and slash game, but as the sequel to the masterfully crafted Devil May Cry, it's pretty much a C-lister. It can be enjoyed in very short bursts, with the few fun bosses that it has, and some of the fun cutscenes that it does have despite the very forgettable story. But, however, as a part of the Devil May Cry series, a franchise that defined what a hack and slash game should play and feel like, it is quite an abysmal failure. If you decide to skip Devil May Cry 2 altogether, you're quite honestly not missing out on anything. If you want to start the series and you're new to it, you're better off starting either at the first Devil May Cry game or the later entries in the series. At this point, it's pretty much common knowledge that Capcom bought Hideaki Tsuno, Power Stone and Street Fighter Alpha director, at the tail end of DMC2's development to salvage the mess made by Mystery Man. However, Itsuno-san was rather unhappy with the final state DMC2 was in, so he made it his sworn mission to make the next game the greatest it could possibly be, to salvage the name of the franchise and his name as a video game director. So join me next time on the... Yo, wait, I get to talk about DMC3, one of the greatest hack and slash video games ever made, and a personal favorite of mine. Stick around for the next episode of the Son of Sparda Retrospective, because it's a guaranteed crazy party. This is the Devil Joe, signing off.